right. Welcome, everybody. It's exciting to see so many people joining the live stream. I'm excited to share with you a few things and few wisdoms, if you will, about enterprise product management. So let me get started. So in essence, the reason for this presentation today is that I feel like our field is more under-resourced than some of the consumer technology product management. You can see that pretty much all the content that you can find online or pretty much all the conferences that you might attend, those are all pretty much focused on the consumer technologies. A lot of larger companies that are producing some consumer goods are basically dominating the market. But at the same time, there's pretty big cohort of enterprise products, and it's not really talked about enough. If you literally Google it, you won't really find a ton of materials around enterprise product management. And that's why I kind of decided to share some of my experiences, some of my learnings, some of the things that I went through experience and basically just learned through, finding some of the pain points and uncovering some of the wisdom myself. So let's get started. And again, I'm super excited to have all of you here. We'll have some Q&A at the end, but feel free to post any questions or any comments that you may have in the chat, and we'll address those as we go. Okay, so first things first. I wanted to introduce myself to make sure that you guys understand why you may want to listen to me and how my experience may be closer to yours or relevant to what you may experience or what you may see in your career. So I'm Gevorg, probably not the easiest name to pronounce, an Armenian one, but still. Okay, I started my career in product management as product owner at a company that was called SFL. So it's an Armenian company that was working with various different clients across the globe. We were pretty much focused on Netherlands or United States, those countries. And I was lucky enough during my time there to work on 3 enterprise products. The first one was enterprise sales enablement technology, which kind of got me into this enterprise world of sales, of the requirements of the salespeople, what's important to them, what's important to sales-driven companies. And I kind of got that experience. At the same time, I worked in highly regulated vendor selection technologies as well. So I kind of understood what it means to be compliant towards healthcare and other highly regulated industries, what it takes to select the vendors that have a ton of impact on your businesses. And the last product that I had there was about the basically content. And everyone is wild these days about personalized video content or personalized content altogether. And I was lucky enough to work at a company that was pioneering some of the video content production automation for largest enterprise companies and brands. So I got very much diverse experience over there that helped me get into Workfront. Back then, I was a product manager over the enterpriseness of the software, pretty much. Workfront was going through this fairly interesting transition where we were focused on project management at first, but then we kind of realized that there is a pretty big market on the enterprise and there is a need for enterprise work management. And that's where I got on board and I tried to figure out what it means to be an enterprise work management software. Because as you can imagine, work means various different things depending on the industry, depending on what it is that you're trying to solve. So my job was really to understand the diverse requirements of different industries and figure out how we can become an enterprise solution of choice. Happily enough, we got there, and the big Workfront back in time was considered the top enterprise work management software according to a lot of analysts and a lot of different reports. And last but not least, now I work as group product manager at Adobe. Basically, I spread my experience to a team of my product managers, and now I work on fairly complex enterprise automation and integration tool along with the developer platform for Adobe. That's just to give you a sense of how I can share some of my knowledge, which comes from different industries, different companies, and different scale of companies, where you can think of SFL as like 200 people company. Then there was Workfront, which was a little above 1,000 employees, and now Adobe is close to 30,000 employees. So it's diverse experience across different companies that I want to share with you today. And all of those things are pretty much the insights that I've got along the way and the insights that I kind of felt like are important to share with you guys. Okay, and last but not least, one of the cool things, I'm based in Armenia, I'm from Armenia, and Armenia has been named as Silicon Mountains, which is kind of cool to have this global impact from a fairly small country in the middle of Europe and Asia. Enough about me, let's dive into the topic itself. So for agenda today, we're generally going to talk about three main things. The first thing is about the enterprise platform definition. We're going to talk about what it actually means to be an enterprise platform and are going to go through the definition of that. Uh, as you can imagine, enterprise is a buzzword and a lot of people are trying to essentially describe it. They describe it with different words, sometimes different terminology, but it's really important to understand what it is that we're trying to build before we actually can get there. So that's the first thing that we're going to uncover today. The second thing that we're going to dive into is the role of a product manager in enterprise products. So you can think about it as a lot of things overlap and we're still doing the same product management and we probably still have kind of close and similar goals, but there's some uniqueness that you need to take into account when you're speaking from the enterprise product perspective. And that's what we're going to deep dive into, and I'll share with you a few of my wisdoms, as I claim, or some of the experiences that I had that I wish I learned earlier, because those would help me make better decisions and navigate the field a little bit better. And third, we're basically going to marry the first two concepts together, and we're going to talk about how we actually are supposed to build this enterprise platforms, enterprise solutions, and act as an enterprise product manager. And again, I'll share some of my experiences, some of the lessons learned, and hopefully those will be applicable to you as well. We'll wrap up with key takeaways and Q&A. So I'll just sum up what it is that we've talked about, and I'll open it up for your questions. Awesome. Let's start with the enterprise platform definition and what it actually means to be an enterprise. As I kind of alluded to in the very beginning, enterprise software is just different. It's not the same as having a mobile app or basically having a consumer B2C type of technology. It has a lot of uniqueness and a lot of nuances to it. So what do we do when we want to define what an enterprise platform is? We ask, what is an enterprise? Which is fairly basic, right? And the key thing here, obviously, I try to summarize it. And when I talk to different people and even customers, I ask them what enterprise means to you. And usually people just, have some sort of explanation, but they are not entirely sure. It's almost like this default type of answer that you have in mind. You kind of understand it, but you can't really describe it. It's on the back of your head. So I did what I think a lot of people do these days. I just search it in Perplexity. Probably 5 years ago, this would have been Google, but now Perplexity is taking over, as a lot of you can imagine. So it gives me a pretty interesting and robust response on what an enterprise means. So I won't read it entirely, but essentially it's about the scale of the company, it's about the structure of the company, it's about how many divisions it has, and basically some of the nuances over there. But when it gets really interesting is some of the characteristics that Perplexity kind of suggests. It's size, complexity, product offerings, and all those things, right? But when I think about enterprise, I feel like there are a few myths that we need to, or misconceptions that we need to address, because I feel like the answer is slightly more nuanced based on the company rather than this default definition of what an enterprise actually means. So if we go there, the enterprise misconceptions, let's talk about a few myths that exist there, right? The first one is enterprises are supposed to be big. Well, this is true, and enterprises are probably not about the small companies. The size of the company varies pretty much a lot, right? So like if you're a two-people company, a company that has 100 employees may sound like huge to you, or may feel like an incredibly large company. Whereas there are companies that have 10,000, 30,000, 50, hundreds of thousands of employees. And on that scale, it's really important to have a definition of what is actually a size of enterprise and what it actually means for our company, right? Because if you're a startup and you're just starting your way with the software business, you may just think about it slightly differently, because for you, your definition of enterprise may still depend on the size, but it may not be similar as, for example, for Adobe, right? And the definition of enterprise for Adobe and for your small startup may be completely different things. The second thing is about recognition. So a lot of people give this response when an enterprise is just basically a brand, a recognizable company that everyone is familiar with, which is not necessarily true. There are huge, enormous companies that are super enterprise that probably not a lot of people have heard of. They may be in some specific area, they may be in specific industry, that are just non-conventional, and they do not really promote themselves because they may work, for example, with government or some of the very specific fields. So the notion of enterprises just being huge companies that everyone is aware of, that's just plainly not true. And again, it really depends on who your target customers are in this scenario. Last but not least, is just you gotta know them, which again is totally not true. It really depends on the field, on the problems that you're solving, and only that determines which companies you should know and which ones you should not. So those are rather myths than than the reality. And now let's take a look at what the reality is. And for good or for bad, the reality is kind of nuanced as well, right? Uh, just as I was alluding to, it really depends on who you define as an enterprise for your particular company. And I can tell you from my experience, when I was working at SFL, and the definition of enterprise companies for us were different, and we're considering smaller companies to be enterprises according to our definition. It was related to their size, some of their ARRs or revenue basically that we can generate from them, or their annual revenue, and some of the requirements on the industries that they're in. So I guess the true reality here might be described as Linus Torvalds put it pretty brilliantly. It depends, as it's almost always the right answer whenever there is a big complex question in place. And you can argue that defining what is and what isn't an enterprise isn't really that big of a question or complex. But the reality is that it really depends on your definition of it and my definition of it, and someone else's definition of it might be fairly different, which is totally okay. That's not a problem at all. Okay, that being said, what I kind of wanted to share with you is the definition of an enterprise platform that I kind of compiled based on my experiences in different companies, based on what I've observed from customers in the industry, in other companies, and basically trends, analysts. That's the brain dump of a lot of experience and time that I put into absorbing a definition of enterprise. So if we were to put those characteristics in categories, there are three bigger chunks of kind of definition of what an enterprise means. And every single time I talk to customers, these three themes or topics are coming up, perhaps in different orders, maybe with slightly different wording, but it's still the same overarching themes that are happening. Okay, so the first thing first, it's manageability. And we'll go deeper into each category in the next slides. Just keep those three big buckets in mind. It's enterprise platform must be manageable, extensible, and trustworthy. So what does actually mean, right? Because words are cool, but we need to understand what it actually means. And I have the breakdown of the subcategories and the descriptions of what customers typically mean when they say that their platform is supposed to be manageable or extensible or trustworthy. So manageability. There are three categories in manageability that kind of summarize the main themes that customers are looking for or the industry is looking for. So the first thing is about being structured. And by structure, we mean that enterprise or larger companies are fairly complex by nature. They may have various different departments. Departments have sub-departments. This hierarchy can go on and on and on. It can be, somewhere between 10, 15, 20, 30, you name it, levels, right? They can have various different reporting lines. They can have different team structures. People can move around between departments here and there. So in essence, the expectation is that an enterprise software is able to reflect that. So like no matter which department that is, no matter which team that is, there can be represented accurately within the enterprise software and platform, and that can be managed effectively by the administrators, the managers, and people like that. The second pillar in manageability is predictability. So this is very nuanced and very specific to the enterprises, but in essence, enterprises are expecting the software to be predictable. This means not just the platform changes or code changes, if you will, but also how do we release software? How do we make updates? How can we expect updates? How do we know that something is coming? And this is basically an insight that was fairly shocking to me when I first joined an enterprise company. I kind of understood that the customers are not really expecting you to deliver software super fast. They rather prefer predictability over speed in a lot of cases. And some customers may rather wait for like a few months for an update to come in, as long as they know about it in advance, rather than get something next day, which is really interesting and really differentiates how enterprises are thinking about their software products. And last but not least, in manageability is localization. So as you can imagine, larger companies have offices in different parts of the world. They have different languages supported. They have very diverse employees in terms of their culture, their localization, and all of that, right? And the expectation for an enterprise platform is to make sure that it can be feel and be native to any person, basically, and no matter where they're from, which language they speak, they basically expect the platform to adopt to all of those kind of changes and shifts. So the expectation is that really, no matter where in the world you are, the software should be able to adopt to your expectations, and that relates not only to the language, but also there are some nuances in number format, dates format, and all of it, right? And people just expect that to be native and kind of just easy to consume and understand in that sense, to prevent data errors and all different types of challenges that it can arise. Awesome. So moving next to the extensibility part of it. Extensibility is also very nuanced and kind of feels like different depending on whether you're working with a B2C company or an enterprise company. It has two main pillars in here. And the first one is configurability, which is kind of difficult to pronounce, but still. The idea there is that every single enterprise have their own unique requirements. And when you think about those requirements, you as a software vendor, software provider, we cannot just accommodate every single request. We cannot build every single feature that every customer wants, because that just doesn't scale. And at some point, you'll hit roadblocks because your customers will ask for things that you're unable to accomplish. You won't be able to have as many developers, and some things fairly are just too specific to build for those particular customers. And instead, what customers do expect is to have some sort of independence and the ability to develop their own code solutions, because almost every single one of enterprise customers, they do have their own development teams, and they do have in-house built software. What they really want is to make sure that they can reuse that software or extend the software that they buy from you by their developers, to make sure they do not need to have a dependency on you to develop something that they really need, which again can be super, super specific. So in this case, we really need, as product managers, we really need to think through building a platform instead of building a solution. And with the platform, we can just enable people to do whatever makes the most sense for them. And the other piece is about connectivity. So as you can imagine, enterprises are using perhaps hundreds of different tools. There was a survey the other day that highlights that enterprises on average use something close to 1,000 different applications. And you can't imagine that, or can't even expect that you are coming in with your one, two, whatever software products, and they are just giving up whatever else they already have. So you need to make sure that whatever solution you build, it can integrate and can connect to the systems that they already have, so that they don't have to sacrifice anything that they already have. That will make the transition smoother, but also will unlock a lot more value and not create, or basically reduce at least, the resistance that you may face otherwise with a larger company implementation. And last but not least, again, trustworthiness, right? It has three different pillars that are, again, super critically important. So the first one is availability. And you can imagine that customers expect enterprise software that they're buying for hundreds of thousands or perhaps even millions of dollars to be always available. And when I say always, it's really critical to understand that they almost expect 100% of availability. Obviously, 100% is not accomplishable or not even realistic, but the majority of customers still expect 4 nines to be a default at least. Because as you can imagine, when some of your consumer software may not work. For example, if Uber is unavailable, you'll just order Lyft or something else, and you'll be pretty much all right. Nothing terrible would happen. If your enterprise software is unavailable, that can be as bad as blocking an entire business from working. And that can cause a loss and damage of millions of dollars, which obviously neither you nor customers want. And that's why availability is a critical requirement for customers. It always comes without saying, but security is another big piece. And here, in the context of security, I'm not just speaking about basically your software to be secure from hackers or anyone else, but it's really to be able to protect the sensitive data that you have within the company. As you can imagine, in large companies, lots of different things can happen, and not everyone should have access to all information all the time. So there should be robust security controls in place so that people can configure who has access to what information and when. And it's, again, super important to have this concept of most limited people access by default. So like whenever you build something or you create something with your product, uh, it should be minimal access to begin with, and then people can expand if they want to, but not the opposite. So it's critically important to have variety in there and basically have sophistication in terms of what it is that you're actually allowing people to do or not allowing people to do. And the last point in the definition of enterprise platform is compliance. So there are different types of compliance or regulatory requirements. Uh, Probably the most prominent one that everyone is aware of is GDPR in Europe, where the data and personal data of users is supposed to be secure and protected. Which is, there are types of requirements that are basically mandatory to operate a business in certain regions or in certain industries. And at the same time, there are some super specific requirements that may unlock a new market for you and create new opportunities. There's fairly famous HIPAA, which is healthcare certification and compliance requirement. There's FedRAMP, which is US government requirement and compliance. There are lots of those. And it's really important to think through features and solutions that you're building in the scope of compliance as well. So like a simple solution that you're building in one of the areas of your product, uh, slightly enhanced, can unlock a new compliance for you, which will open up a new market and which can basically create an opportunities for your business growth that you haven't considered before. That's for the definition of enterprise platform. I hope by this time you already have a pretty good idea of what it means to be an enterprise and what an enterprise platform actually means. Again, there are three pillars in it. It's manageability, extensibility, and trustworthiness. Uh, they all have their nuances that we just covered, and I hope that kind of sticks. So let's go into what it actually means to be a product manager for an enterprise. What's your role, and how do you actually become successful in building an enterprise product? Because as we kind of discussed and kind of alluded to, it's not only nuanced, but rather difficult, and you may require a little bit different skill set than you would require otherwise for a regular product, which is consumer or B2C, as you can say. So to begin with, I kind of wanted to draw this Venn diagram, which kind of explains an enterprise product manager, consumer product manager, and some of the things that kind of overlap. We won't necessarily go into every single one of those points, but what's really different for consumer and enterprise is long sales cycles. So like for consumer PM, your customers came in through some channel, they've seen your product, they found the value, and it's usually not a big deal for them to buy your product. which means that it can happen within a matter of moments or minutes. With enterprise, that's not usually how things work, and very commonly it may take a few months or up to a year to essentially nurture and talk through deal, talk through all details, and basically close your customer, which obviously involves a lot of different conversations and collaboration at different stages. But essentially, what I'm trying to allude to is on the left, you can see some of the things that are super critical for an enterprise PM that consumer PMs may not care as much about. And that's where essentially the difference in even skill set happens, right? Because, if you talk through, if you think through a day-to-day for a consumer PM and enterprise PM, high-touch customer service, while it may still be something that consumer PM may be interested in, it rather won't be a requirement to a large sense because if you lose one or two customers when you're in B2C, again, as an example, Uber, right? If one or two people won't order a taxi or take or food or something, while it's not pleasant, that's not a super big deal in the grand scheme of things because you probably have other millions or hundreds of millions of users. Whenever you're an enterprise PM, one of your customers may generate revenue of like tens of millions of dollars. And in that case, you would really, really care about making sure that their deal is successful, that they're closing, and that they're moving forward successfully within the pipeline and basically adopting your product. So moving forward, my enterprise product wisdom number one, which is kind of counterintuitive, but the general sentiment is that enterprise PMs are typically more closer to the customers than the consumer tech product managers may be. And the reason here is that whenever you are a consumer product manager, you typically have loads of users, right? And talking to them happens, of course. That's part of the job, but it's not really something that you do maybe on a consistent basis, or in this case, it might be even easier to just follow the data, right? Do A/B tests, rapidly deploy something, get feedback, and do more of a hypothesis validation in that regard. When you're an enterprise PM, you probably have way less customers, and in that grand scheme of things, you basically may talk to your customers almost every month because you don't really need all those customers. And there's just a cap even to how many customers you can grow, right? If you think about Fortune 500, that's limited number of clients and limited number of companies. Whereas consumer tech is really almost like unlimited. There are billions of people out there that you can go and reach. So and enterprise PMs just have deeper empathy with their customers. And the reason there is that you need to be super deep into the weeds of their business and really understand what it is that they're trying to build. Because otherwise, you won't be able to solve their real life problems if you don't understand. For example, if you're building some software for a healthcare business, you have to be an expert in healthcare, or at least have a deep understanding of what that field is about and what are the main challenges there. Because otherwise, your solution either is going to be too broad to be useful, or it's not going to hit the mark, and they'll just figure out that there are probably other better products that really understand their needs. The common challenges that enterprise PMs meet, because obviously there are lots of challenges there. First thing is high standards. So the thing is that typically enterprise customers want things to be fully ready, end-to-end tested, production ready. There should not be any bugs or anything. They don't really like half-baked solutions, is what I'm trying to say. And that makes it kind of hard to recruit some beta testers, beta customers, because they just expect the final ready thing to be there. Whereas it's obviously very, very different in consumer tech. So this kind of creates this burden of, and essentially an expectation that whatever you're building is super cool, fully tested, and available to them. The second thing is adoption barriers. And this was another very mind-blowing realization for me, that buying software and using software, even if you've paid a few $1 million for it, is not the same thing. And what I mean by it is there's always transition costs. And whenever people and customers are buying some new software, there needs to be training, there needs to be implementation, there needs to be requirements gathering. All of those things take time. And the more time it takes, the more questionable it will become for them whether this is the right product that I'm buying, because I have to spend 6 months to a year to actually start using it and getting value from it while I'm actually paying for it already. And the second thing to consider here is the more barriers you have in adopting your solution, the harder it's going to be for you to actually, sell it, because customers are going to compare, and lower barrier entrance product is going to hit the mark better and is going to actually win the market over time. And last but not least, and especially painful for a product manager, is roadmap disruptions. So large customers usually come in, they're asking for things, they're asking for new features, and it usually derails our roadmap, because you can imagine if there is a customer who comes in and they're like, we're paying you $1 billion if you only do this, this, and that. That can quickly override some of the things that you might already have and planned on your roadmap, which is very risky and super unpleasant when you are a product manager. So let's dive into that one particularly in the next few slides. So at first, I kind of wanted to explain what are the tools to kind of fight that situation. And as simple as it may sound, that's strategy and vision. So if you're just blindly taking the requests from customers, that would just lead to a feature factory and a disjointed product. At the end, you'll just have a bunch of features, but those won't really achieve, your strategy, your vision. Those won't make you different. They will just be there, and over time, people will just find a better suiting product that actually has a point and will switch over. So even building those features is not a guarantee when you don't have a clear strategy and vision. And just taking customer requests, while sometimes maybe necessary and required, is definitely not the best strategy. You need to have a strategy behind the decisions that you make, because a lot of the times you can just explain to customers, and a lot of them are just fairly reasonable people. You can just explain the decisions that you made and explain the strategy, and they'll just understand that it actually makes sense, because the things that they were asking about may not be the most important things to have, and they'll just kind of get this point of, okay, now I get it, because this solves a different problem that I didn't even know that I have. But now that you have this solution, it just makes my life so much better. So strategy is critical in making product decisions, is the point that I'm trying to make. And the other thing is basically having your North Star. You need to understand what your end game is, because otherwise, if you don't have a direction, it's very easy to get lost, right? And you need to have your basically destination point and the world that you're trying to build. Otherwise, there is no point in building this product. And you need to have that very clear, because that's important not just for the customers or for the business, but it's very important for your teams as well, because you need to all be aligned on the direction that you're taking. And that's why it's super important to have the clear definition of your North Star. Obviously, these are cool words, bullet points, but I wanted to make sure that this point is clear and crisp and it kind of remains with you guys. That's why I added a few illustrations just to better kind of highlight the point. Okay, so this is what happens usually with a lot of enterprise companies when large customers coming in and asking for some feature. And in this case, this is a trivial example of the faster horse, right? But that's essentially what happens in lots of companies. So they're asking for faster horse, and there you go. You were paying us whatever millions or billions of dollars. There you go. It's priority. We're done there. What would have been a better approach is actually trying to understand the needs and the requirements of the customers and what they're actually trying to solve, and kind of absorb and accommodate and distill that under an umbrella of overarching theme that they're trying to solve. So in this case, faster horse is there for speed, right? Or for getting somewhere or for doing some critical activity. And in this case, a simple question and a simple generalization kind of change the conversation, and now you know what else is important for your customers. And probably if this conversation continues, they'll uncover why some of those things are important, and probably there is a priority order of those things, so that they can basically understand that, what, well, speed is important, reliability matters more, and that would mean that you can just prioritize some things that are related to reliability rather than just focusing on the speed. And just to make sure that this point is clear, I actually included a real world example that happened with one of the founders that I really respect and admire to a degree. That's Des Trainer from Intercom. So that guy is co-founder of Intercom. So what happened is that he posted on Twitter. It was Twitter back in time. It's now X. That a Google Calendar integration would be super cool for Slack, because that will help you kind of understand when someone is in a meeting and kind of explain why they're not responding, right? To which Slack's official account in Twitter responded that we definitely want to make it better to know when someone is unavailable and why, which is essentially the core of what he was trying to say, right? It's not about Google Calendar. It's not about some sort of notification. It's about understanding when somebody is unavailable and why. And that kind of fitted pretty perfectly into their product roadmap and vision and direction, which I feel like is something that we as product managers should be asking more often. And perhaps we're just not doing that enough. Cool. And the other realization that is kind of feels like a little bit of segue there, but it's really important and very unique to the enterprises, is that your customer and your user are not the same people. What I mean by that is that you can imagine in large organizations, the people who are actually signing the paycheck and the people who are actually using the software are very different people. So for your customers, you need to convince perhaps a VP, SVP, some C-level executive to buy your product, and you need to make a point how your product will solve their problems and how it's better than everything else they have ever experienced before. Whereas the user is the people who are actually going to use them afterwards, right? Use your product. So you can imagine that will be a project manager, some sort of administrator, some IT people, or just workers of your company. And sometimes you need to sell the solutions to your customers, and then you need to make sure that your users are also happy with the solution, because there is a pretty big trend or market shift that is happening right now, where previously you could just convince the VP, they will just buy the product and people would have to use it, want it or not, which still happens today, don't get me wrong, but it kind of affects the retention over time, because if your users are hating the software, they're complaining about it every single day, and over time, that feedback will just pop up to your to the VP or to the sponsor, basically at that company, and they will start looking for a change. Because if the software is clearly something that users are hating and they don't want to work with it or anything, that just won't last, right? Obviously, there are exceptions, and if you are just delighting your customer but not delighting your user, that creates this enterprise software that is alive, that is there, but everyone just hates it. I won't give examples just because it kind of feels like unethical to a degree, because I have deep respect to those enterprise platforms that kind of succeeded still. But the idea here is that you first of all need to acknowledge that customer and user in this context are super different, and those allude to very different people. And at the same time, you need to understand that delighting one or the other won't make you stick and won't make you last forever. You need to make sure that your customers are delighted and they make the decision to buy the software, but then your users are actually retention drivers. And you need to make sure that your users are also successful and happy with the product, so that they can make sure that it never leaves the company and it always stays and provides value. So far, so good. Okay, now let's kind of conclude the topics that we kind of discussed before, and let's allude to actually building the enterprise products, right? What are the complexities? How can we achieve success? How can we apply the knowledge about enterprise platform definition, and also the role of product manager in an enterprise company? So first things first, there's this interesting paradigm that move fast, break things, learn fast, fail fast, all of those things. Within the enterprise world, those are just generally recipes for disaster. because again, I was alluding to this point perhaps in availability a little bit, but if something doesn't work in an enterprise software, that can paralyze an entire organization from working, and that can result in millions of dollars of loss of productivity, and that generally won't ever help, right? The interesting thing is that customers expect upgrades, they expect improvements, they expect all of it, but they never expect that to come at the expense of quality. Whereas some consumer software, people can be more tolerable, or I guess more welcoming in that sense, because if it's not available right now, it may be available like in an hour or so, and that will be completely fine. But here, if something breaks in the midday of Monday morning, that's not going to land well, especially when customers have something critical planned using your software. So it's very critical to pay attention to quality. And in a lot of cases, quality should come over speed and be the first priority, instead of just being something that you can sacrifice sometimes for the sake of speed. That just doesn't work for the enterprise. That alludes to essentially the enterprise product lifecycle. And obviously, a lot of us as product people have seen this image of MVP, where we have a pretty basic explanation of what MVP should not look like and what it should look like, which is the illustration on top and on the bottom, which actually is not true for the enterprises, which is kind of interesting, right? Uh, Enterprises do not like half-baked solutions. They don't like the MVP concept at all. What they really need is a sophisticated solution to a problem or a set of problems. And unless you can actually solve the problem completely, that won't really satisfy the enterprise needs. Because chances are there are competitors in place that either can solve the problem already or have a better plan to tackle the problem. That's why the way that the enterprises are typically looking at similar challenges is through the lenses of land and expand, which means that you, as an enterprise product, you basically nail one set of problem or a few problems in a similar space. You just nail it. You're just best in class for solving those types of problems. And then you land and expand, right? And then and obviously I should have added GIFs to make this presentation more interactive, but you get the point. The point is really that we need to land successfully within a department of the company, within even a team at a large enterprise company. Nail their problems, demonstrate results, be super, super good at what we do, and then that just drives the expansion. Because now it's it's basically easier to expand within a company that is a customers of yours, rather than enter a net new space, right? So once you've landed a customer because you're super good at what you do, you know the problem, you understand the space, you kind of know how to solve that particular set of problems, that's where you can expand and you can go to the next level, and you can solve more problems for more departments, more business cases, and all of it. So that's the preferable way for customers instead of MVP. If you just give them something that is sort of like beta, kind of has some features but doesn't have a lot of the others, they just won't even look at it, to be completely honest. Which kind of brings me to the other point, and that is about solving simple business problems isn't going to make you any money. Solving the hard one does. Because if problem is super simple, chances are that enterprises are already solving it, or they have enough resources to solve those themselves. We, as enterprise software providers, are essentially being paid for solving the really, really hard problems that enterprises either don't have time to think about or don't have a solution. And we are there as essentially a painkiller to make sure that we can solve the super hard things that are causing them disruptions, troubles, and we can make their lives way, way better and easier. So this is really important mantra to address. If your business problem is that simple, chances are enterprises just won't need it because there is already a solution in place. All right, now we are down to our key takeaways. So 3 things, really. I wanted to keep it simple, pretty straightforward, and also something that can stick with you. So the first thing is first things first, just make sure that you get the clear understanding of what enterprise means. It doesn't have to be the same thing that Perplexity gives you as a result or that I described today, but it has to be something that you within your company are aligned to, so that at least within the scope of your company, there's not confusion about what it actually means to be an enterprise and who your enterprise customers are. It's critically important, and that will drive some of the decisions that you may make about your roadmap and the solutions that you deliver. The second thing is about understanding the nuances of being an enterprise PM and basically claiming and understanding your role, right? Some people are still kind of trying to navigate the space as consumer PMs, which is still fine, but you won't be as successful as it could be if you would embrace the opportunities that enterprise product management provides and the innovations that you can do in the space. And I can assure you there are plenty of opportunities there to be super successful and solve some of the super coolest and harder problems that are out there for customers. And the last thing is about adopting this enterprise mindset. So this is essentially the point that I was making the last. It's about solving super hard problems for some of the largest and most sophisticated companies in the world. You have to adopt the enterprise mindset. You have to think like they think about their business, right? You have to be an expert about their problem spaces. You have to understand all of it. And it all starts with a simple step of adopting the enterprise mindset and really understanding what it is that enterprises need and what are the problems that they are trying to solve and how they try to change the world, basically, and how you can be there to support them in that. Awesome. That leaves me to Q&A. That was all for my presentation today. Awesome. Thank you so much for all the questions. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to answer them along the way, but yeah. Now we're at the point of asking questions, Gleb. Thank you for that. You can go ahead. Oh, Helen already answered. Okay. Okay, so the question from Sophia is, can you please expand on your customer is not your user paradigm and give an example from your experience? That's a very good question. So the way that I would structure it is perhaps with Workfront. With Workfront is actually more nuanced than that. When a company is buying Workfront as an enterprise software management, work management software, what really happens there is that first you have a customer, the person who actually makes the decision about buying the software, right? So the person who kind of pays the paycheck and signs the check, C-level, VP, people like that. Then there is a person who actually manages the solution that they buy. So like the system administrator type of person. They are in close contact. They are our main point of contact to ask for feedback, coordinate, and collaborate with them. What's really interesting there is those system administrators, at the same time, they have their customers. So like they have their own user base, right? They actually act as the owner of your software within their companies. And that's why they're kind of super sensitive in terms of the changes that you deploy, the things that are being brought to the product. And in that sense, you can think of it as the various different levels. So there are the customers who are paying the paycheck, there are system administrators who are managing the software, and then at the end, there are the end users, the people who are actually using your software. So there's like the 3-layer structure. And sometimes it's kind of hard to get to the end users, to be very honest, because the system administrators are being typically protective because they're like, those are my users. If you have you want to have any feedback, I'll give you feedback. But those are my people, kind of thing. So that's probably the simplest example that I have in mind from my experience that is kind of explaining and walking through the paradigm even a little bit more. Hope that answers your question, Sophia. Okay, Gleb. Gevorg, what advice would you give to someone aspiring to transition into enterprise product management? It seems unclear what to focus on. This is a very good question. And essentially, it all starts with understanding the enterprises. So essentially the fundamentals that I gave about what actually an enterprise platform is, right? And then once you have that understanding, it's really this paradigm shift of thinking about the processes at large companies, how they buy software, how they change software, how they implement software, And actually understanding some of those processes would be a kickstart to basically shift your mind, right? Because at that point in time, you'll be focusing more on the business side of things, on stakeholder management, on those sort of things that are probably a little bit more nuanced and I guess more complex than a lot of people will think. And that's where I would recommend you start. Perhaps if you're not a product manager at the moment and you're just trying to get into product management, a way to do that might be to start at a different position with the company. So like start as a salesperson at an enterprise company, sales intern even, or customer support. You'll just basically get a sense of how customers are interacting with the software, and essentially you'll see a pretty interesting dynamic into how how the problems are being brought up and how are they going getting escalated. So that's kind of unique and interesting paradigm. Uh, Perhaps one of the other things that I can recommend you, Gleb, is there are plenty of companies that have both consumer PMs and enterprise PMs. They have various different offerings that you can basically try to navigate into different team dynamics. A good example here might be Amazon, if that interests you. So like Amazon has both super consumer oriented products, things like their video services, their marketplace, and all of it. But at the same time, they have pretty big enterprise business like AWS as an example, which is slightly more on the technical side of things, but still provides you an idea of how even a single company might have both problems or both positions and both types of PMs available to you. I hope that helps. Okay. Then Gleb had the follow-up. It just seems that after a small startup and maximum flexibility and speed, the transition to corporate product manager is a completely different world, which you're exactly right, that is. And at the same time, there is this interesting thing that you don't have to work at an enterprise company to build enterprise software, which is, again, slightly nuanced and very important definition. When you think about it, is like you can be a small startup that builds enterprise softwares that solves some of the very specific and unique kind of area, right? As an example, I've came across a company that was basically doing the security background checks. Like, for example, if you think about it as a company hires someone, they're going through a security check to make sure that person is not criminal or haven't done anything that is not compliant with the company policy. That is a very narrow and specific problem to solve, which some of the enterprise companies might not have built in-house, and you can be a super small company to get started with that, which would mean that you may have some advantages towards those kind of slower and bigger competitors, where you'll be faster, more dynamic, and have all of that, right? And at the same time, you can also be an enterprise PM at a large company like I am at Adobe, right? Adobe is a huge company, enterprise company, and we're building largely enterprise software for some of our customers. So there's this dynamic as well where you don't necessarily have to be part of the large enterprise company to build enterprise software, which I feel like is very important and may provide you an easier entry point to enterprise product management. All right, so Alex has a question about how do you gather and incorporate customer feedback into your product development process. That's really a good question. So long story short, so one thing that enterprise PMs do constantly, and perhaps more than any other types of PMs, is you always talk to your customers. I have customer meetings and customer calls pretty much every day. And the reason is like you really need to understand what those guys are up to, what bothers them, what are some of the points of feedback, and how they're actually using your system. So first things first is obviously just talking to customers. There is no substitute for that. You need to build relationships, you need to build trust, and they need to know that there's someone at that company who understands them and tries to solve their problems. So that's number one, right? The second piece is about how do we incorporate that into product development process. And the thing there is really that you first of all need to make sure that you're not going with a single customer request, but you rather are thinking about how can I solve this in a platform mindset? So how can I solve this in a way that would solve problems for other customers as well, and won't be a one-off solution for a single customer request? Because again, there is this risk with enterprise software to fall into a feature factory category, where essentially, as long as customers are paying for you, you're just building whatever they want, which is super bad strategy and won't really help you along the way, and won't help you build a successful product that would stand, essentially. I hope that answers your question. Thanks for that, Alex. So let's go with Ilya. Hi, what strategies do you use to foster innovation within your product team? This is also super cool, and especially a very relevant question in the now in the world that we're living right now. Just because if you think about AI and all the innovations that are happening, we need to be on top of technology, is what I'm trying to say. But at the same time, sometimes innovations are not about the technology itself, but rather about the way that you're trying to solve a problem for a customer. So in this case, what I would just basically ask my team to do is to think about the problems in an unconventional way. And I was even planning to call this presentation unconventional wisdoms. But essentially, it's like, how can we solve this problem differently? How can we solve it in a way that no one else has solved before? And that really comes to an open conversation. And the cool thing is that there are no bad ideas. So like whenever or whatever you have on your mind basically goes, and you can try it out, right? And then we go in and try to co-innovate with customers, which means that we may have some mocks, we may have some basic explanation of the solution, and we'll try to validate that with them without directly asking them about the solution. So it's almost like this mom's test. So like they cannot lie to you, but rather can just give you the honest answers and opinions, and you can figure out whether something actually works or doesn't work for them. I hope that covers your question, Celia, or question in this case. Okay, Jim, can you dwell on how you handle the challenges of legacy systems when introducing new products or new features? That's again a super cool question, and there are, I guess, few ways to answer that. So there is the first thing first is whenever you're landing at a customer, they already have a lot of software that they were using before. Chances are you're not solving the net new problem. You're typically solving the problem that they already had and they somehow solved, or it was too difficult for them to solve, but that's a different story. So what you need to make sure is that you're taking into account their existing systems, and you're not asking them to just stop using the previous systems, but you rather create this transition plan, if you will, for them on how you actually want them to move to your solution. So that's critically important, and a must-have point that we need to take into account. At the same time, there are questions about how you modernize your own product, because a lot of the enterprise companies that were there before, like enterprise solutions, I can guarantee you most of them are in the old architecture. They're monolithic. They're not great, basically, in a lot of senses. So you need to take care about keeping the balance between delivering new software products and new solutions, and also making sure that you modernize your existing solutions as well. Because just as I said, it's very, very, very important to be performant and available all the time. And if you're not investing in your infrastructure, in your technologies, that's just not going to happen. So that's really important to keep that balance and make sure that you're keeping in mind everything that is that your customers are already using today. Okay, so Gleb, thank you so much for the feedback. Appreciate it. And then there's Daniel. Please share any examples of how customer insights have influenced the product decisions significantly. Thanks. Yeah, that's a very good point. So let me think about some of it. I'm trying to think through a good example that would illustrate this, but I think I'll share with you one, which is something that happened in my experience, and that significantly influenced the decision. because the decision was not to build the product, which is again very important, right? Whenever you have some of the hypotheses that seem to be great at first, because all hypotheses feel like that, what you're trying to do essentially there is to validate whether you want to actually do something before before investing those heavy engineering resources. Because one of the things that I wanted to mention is within large companies, one of the most important things that you need to focus on is buying from your leadership. Essentially, you have large clients that you definitely don't want to lose, and therefore leadership is usually very keen to know what it is that needs to happen with the product, and they need to know what it is that they need to fund to make sure that you're building the right thing. So anyway, what we were doing back then, we discovered that within Workfront there was a pretty big percentage of customers who were using multiple instances of Workfront. So essentially, they had a few different environments, few different URLs, and what was happening there is like they didn't really have uh, connection between all of those, and that essentially they were operating as separate companies, pretty much. So within those separate companies, what was really important is like uh, they kind of were losing the value of the product that we were building, and we wanted to make sure that we provide them a way to consolidate those environments, like merge them basically. We had the concept, we had the idea, that was really great, but then when we started to dive deeper, we kind of found that a lot of people are not looking at that as a challenge that would be solved by technology solely, but it's rather something that they need organizational buy-in for. So in essence, they were just trying to basically just go through the change management process, figure out what needs to be merged, what should not be merged, how can things be different. So in that sense, we made this decision to kill the product and kill the solution because we felt like it's not a technology challenge that people are wanting to solve. And instead, we addressed that by introducing them to our partner network. And those partners were going in and doing the consolidations through the full change management process for our customers. So that's probably the insights that just came to my mind as the first one. And essentially, it's as important to kill products when they are not needed as as keep them and build them. It's actually better to kill the product that no one is going to use. So that was a very good question. Thank Daniel. And Helena. So, what are the nuances of being an enterprise PM at a big and small startup? Your experience would be super useful for novice specialists choosing a company to work at. Yeah, so I kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier, but the essence is that there is a big difference of, first of all, you can build enterprise software being at an enterprise company, like a large company, and you can build enterprise software being a startup, being a super small company, few people, but you can still build enterprise software. And the differences there are really in the bigger company, it's all about having those buy-ins from leadership, because chances are that whenever you are a larger company, you already have some customers, you already have some customer base, you already have some revenue, and you're pretty much established at that point in time. But what you want to make sure is that the most important thing there is to communicate with your leadership, getting buy-in, and buy-in is probably like the most important thing that you could do there. Socialize all your ideas, solutions, and basically get alignment across the board from your leadership, from your teams, from your counterparts, partners, all of them. So that's probably like the most nuanced thing over there, because you already have revenue, customers, and all of them, right? At the startup company, probably the most important thing for you is to be really, really good at solving the problem, to be really fast and really high quality. So you still need to comply with all the requirements that I was mentioning before, all the expectations that enterprise platforms should be supporting. But at the same time, you have the luxury of faster communication and faster decision-making process, so that at that stage you are just able to basically move towards faster delivery, I guess, at the same time without going through this whole cycles of approvals, decisions, and all of it. It's almost like in big companies the decisions are typically top down, In smaller companies, it's really bottom-up decisions that are being made faster. So those are the nuances that you need to look for, and that will probably determine, which company is better suited for your particular case, or based on your particular goals. All right. Well, thank you very much. The stream took slightly longer than I expected, but thank you for all the engagements and all the questions. This was really, really good. In case you may want to stay in touch later on, here is my LinkedIn. I would love to hear from you. We can discuss all things enterprise. I love to hear from professionals and discussing different use cases. Otherwise, thank you very much. This was super cool for me to share and hopefully insightful and helpful for you as well. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.